Okay. Is everyone able to hear me? Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I see Brian's logged in. We're still waiting for Dave. Brian, you can unmute yourself if you'd like. Hi.
Hello.
See, we've got a fair few people here so far. Hoping more will join us as we go. But we're recording this, so it will be up and available to watch. I created a special YouTube channel to share this, and I'll be sharing the link. And it'll be pinned, and then we're going to go from there. So a quick review of how we're going to do this. I'm going to ask the questions you all have submitted, maybe do some follow-ups of my own here and there, but for the most part I'm just going to ask questions and shut up and let Brian and Dave talk. We have the follow-up channel that I'm also going to be monitoring for you all to ask follow-up questions. Just type them in there, and kind of at my discretion, or if Brian or Dave see them and want to answer them, we'll bring them up. But other than that, we're going to go through the questions. It'll take kind of what it takes, and we'll see how long we can get Brian and Dave to talk today. Let's see if I can get Dave to join here. And Brian, did you want to say anything, kind of introduce yourself? I mean, most people at least probably know your name, but maybe not your history or what you do with the KenzerCo.
Sure, yeah. I'm one of the founding members of Kenzer and Company. We started it back in 1993. It was a conversation in a bar. I think it may have been after a wedding or something even, and Dave came to a bunch of our friends from high school and college and said, hey, I want to start a company, and I think we can do better than some of the stuff that's out there. So, of course, with our drunken hubris, we all agreed, of course, we could do better. So I think it was like the spring or summer of 1993 that we formed the company with the goal to start initially making AD&D compatible products. I think everybody was playing second edition at that time. And it was with people we knew in high school and college. We hadn't met Jolly at that point. But I've been kind of in and out of the company over the years in terms of how much I've been participating, because I've left a few times or not really left, but taken a break to work on my regular full-time engineering job. So I've been trying to get a little bit more involved lately.
All right. Awesome. Also, if you want, you can, on the bottom, there's a button to enable your video if you wanted to share your video. Obviously, if you don't want to, that is all you. And then we're still trying to get Dave to join. So in the meantime, there are a couple I can ask you, and we can circle around and ask Dave those when he joins. So some of the more personal questions. We'll start with, what was your favorite product to work on of all the ones you've done any rules on?
There's been a ton. I mean, I think working on the 4th edition HackMaster Player's Handbook was a blast back in the day. Like, I guess that was probably around 1999 or year 2000, something like that. Just because it was such fantastic material we were working with, and kind of retooling, taking it apart and putting it back together with our own vision. The other, I think, smaller product that I've always said I really enjoyed working on was called the Trove of Treasure Maps, where we had it was like a map contest. We had people send in maps, and they just had strange legends and icons, and I looked at these and just started writing adventures around the maps. So that was one that was a lot of fun to get creative with.
Right. So maybe go into the 4th edition book, Player's Handbook. did it go through a ton of really large changes as you worked on it, or like how close to how you originally envisioned it being did you think? Do you think that came out?
Yeah, it went through a lot of changes. I mean, we had a license at the time to use first and second edition material, and depending on what portions we were drawing from, they were different in many ways. So we kind of had to integrate what we saw at the time as the best portions of each system, and then there was already sort of talk in Knights of the Dinner Table about what Hackmaster was regarding things like building points and the honor system. So we knew we had to change some things and incorporate these add-ons. So it started, I think, at its core with first edition AD&D, and then it got revamped with a lot of the rules adds, and really the combat system was probably a creation of David, and how we introduce our home rules that we had used at the time to make the combat system better. And then I think the current edition of Hackmaster even took that to the next level with the count up system and made it even more playable, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. That's nice. Sorry, brain is still a little foggy at the moment as I roll into this. So our next question was that I have here: has any rule, character option, or monster that you created or developed been disappointing to you, or that like since it's come out and you've seen it played, that you've thought should work or function a lot differently?
I certainly don't want to critique anything in the current game, but I think in 4th edition, the rule was, based on our license at the time, there had to be sort of a parody element to the game, even though it was certainly a very real and playable game. So a lot of the monsters, and there were so many of them, something like 1,600 or something crazy like that, but some of them just came up as being kind of ridiculous, and once in a while we'd see the artwork for something and say, oh, boy, how'd that get in there? When you have that much creation going on, sometimes, some of it's good and brilliant and some of it's not as good.
Nice. So I'm also trying to message Dave while we're talking, so if I seem a little...
Yeah, I sent him and Jolly a text. I don't know if... hang on, let me send him a text too.
Yeah, appreciate it. So,
that's funny, because I thought I was going to be the one who missed this based on our conversation earlier today, and now I'm the only one on.
Yeah. Sorry, clearly you can hold water on your own there.
We use an app called Slack to manage our communication in the company, and I just sent Dave a message on Slack as well.
Great. So you said you don't...
Yeah, I mean, I can answer a lot of questions on history and subjective opinions like that. If people want, if we're going to get into more questions about direction of the company, those are all for Dave.
Yeah. So you mentioned before, when I first asked that last question, that you don't want to criticize the current product. If you spend some time on the server, you'll see there's a fair bit of discussion about ways that things could be clearer or more neat, more organized in the current edition. And we certainly want you to gainsay or badmouth it, but I don't think would it be unfair to ask you to talk about just maybe some of the things that you do feel could use improvement, especially with Dave having talked on the forums about doing a rewrite of the PHP?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we're constantly taking notes every time we game about things that aren't clear and need to be expanded on or retooled. I think skills is probably a good example. I'm the one who came up with the roll under your percentage approach for skills, and looking back, I think that's more complicated for people than I originally expected. And I think we ran an article George Field wrote about kind of converting it to a rollover type approach, which I think is more intuitive and I like better. So, that's one example. I think people have a lot of questions on, well, what if this happens? What if this happens? What if this, and, with spells and different things. We can't cover every scenario. So, obviously, I think most people know you've got to cover some things yourself when you come across something that isn't really explained in the rules. But although Hackmaster does get into a ton of detail on unusual situations, as much as we could cover.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned myself in the rules questions forum multiple times. Like, can't have everything. Though I wish we could, but,
Yeah.
300...
David and I really enjoyed playing the Temple of Elemental Evil back in the day when we were playing AD&D. And I don't know if people are familiar with that one. We redid it for 4th edition as the Temple of Existential Evil, which was a blast to work on. But there's these areas in that adventure called elemental nodes. So it's like you're going to another plane of existence, and characters in there take damage for an amount of time that they're in there. And the unusual thing to us was, if you wander around in there long enough, not only are there monsters, but you can meet other NPCs that were, adventurers or some other people that somehow got transported into these nodes. And we never really understood how these guys lived that long in there if they were constantly taking damage and they didn't have healing spells. So we went to Gen Con one year and saw Gary Gygax. I think we waited in line to talk to him, and we went up and asked him that question, like, hey, in the Temple of Elemental Evil, how do these guys survive in the nodes? And he just said, they get used to it.
They get used to it. We did end up having a question about, because you brought up the skill rolls and that you came up with that system, and there was a question about how you all ended up settling on that, and why you chose a D100.
Yeah, we're big fans of larger ranges of dice, because I think it gives you more flexibility in defining bonuses and penalties. And I think 3rd edition D&D went with the D20 system for skill checks, and we wanted to be a little different and go with a larger die range that would allow for that many more specific modifiers. So that was kind of the idea behind it. And that's sort of the concept between like our D1000 fumble table and our D10,000 critical hit table. It just creates such a range of possibilities. I think one drawback in the early rules of RPGs that we saw was you'd roll on a table with, a D10 or something, and one result would be go see this other table. And we thought there's no reason for it if you just make the range of the table bigger. So that was kind of the idea, is just to make things not have to flip around from table to table. Certainly, that's what we try to do.
So just so that you can fit more into the single table and make everything in like a one-stop shop.
Right. And even like the concept of getting fractional ability scores, I think is, in some sense, you could argue that, a 0.01 is trivial on your ability scores. But I found that in playing D&D, when they introduced the Cavalier, I think it was, and you could increase ability scores as you went up in level, and then certainly I think Strength had the percentile scores if you had an 18. That made it so exciting to me, even if it's trivial. And as you level up in the current edition of Hackmaster, you get the die rolls on your ability scores to increase. Even if it's a trivial amount, it feels like you're getting something. To me, that was always, or has been, an exciting part of character development is getting better, even if it's in a small incremental way.
That's right. Well, and then going back to the skills, I want to finish up this one so I don't forget it. Why'd you decide on like the opposed versus static skills? I guess might be the way to say it. Unopposed.
Yeah, a lot of skills I think just come naturally in that way. I mean, an easy way to do it, I guess, would be, all right, the game master just decides a difficulty class, and you have to beat that, right? That's how third edition was.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't really factor in how good your opponent is at something. I mean, I guess the game master can just say, okay, well, their difficulty class is better because they're better at this. But if you're talking about player versus player type skill checks, the game master shouldn't set a difficulty class there. It should be based on the character's own abilities, and this way you can kind of create NPCs that have their own skill levels. And I think making opposed rolls gives it that element of excitement too. Like you do your best, take your best shot, and then the other player you're opposing takes their best shot. And it adds that element of randomness both ways, not just for the player rolling the die.
All right. Makes a ton of sense. And then for you, how does your creative process tend to work? Like, how do you start on a new project, blank sheet of paper, and then kind of what are the steps you like to go through?
Yeah, I start with an idea and try to start writing oftentimes like finished text right from the beginning. And I've been educated by Mr. Kenzer that that's really hard and I should start with an outline. So I try to do that more, is just like jot down in notes what I want to cover and then expand on different things from there. And I've read some articles by other writers, and sometimes you come to a section and you're like, God, I don't know what I'm going to write for this, and it's just a huge wall. And the best thing to do there is just make a note saying, I'm not sure about this now, come back to it, and then go do some other piece of the manuscript. So there's a lot of those little notes in there. Every once in a while, something like that will slip through editing and make it to the final copy, but we try to avoid that as much as we can.
And I want to dovetail into that. I'm going to break my own thing about not necessarily talking about me. And for those who don't know, I've been trying to submit a combatant's guide for fighters and things to them and getting some feedback. And so I felt like I was kind of stumbling into it, trying to submit things for the first time, because I never have for any game, let alone this one. And so for those who want to approach you all and submit stuff, what advice would you have for anybody who's thinking about that?
I think rather than just submitting an idea, we do want to see an outline of what you have in mind. Even if you're writing a Knights of the Dinner Table article that's not that lengthy, it should identify the points you want to cover. Not just, hey, I want to write an article about rings or something like the magic rings or standard rings or something like that. But certainly there's got to be an outline. It can't just be I've got this idea for doing something or other. And, that is probably a bare minimum if we've worked with you before. I think if we haven't worked with you before, we would want to see at least like a first chapter written in hopefully what you would consider final text, self-edited, edited by a friend. We want to, we're impressed by things that read well and seem to need very little editing on our part. And when I say editing, I'm not talking about, rules and stuff. We'll certainly have commentary on there if there's new rules or aspects of the existing rules that maybe aren't covered correctly, but just the mechanics of writing English. That's not why I got involved in this company. I want people to submit things that are correct.
Okay. It's like for new writers, wrap up the grammar and have all that really solid. So
Yes,
that you're
for
just working
sure.
on the mechanical stuff.
Yeah, if you send it, if someone sends us something and it's got all these grammatical errors and spelling errors and things, we probably won't even want to work with you. And that's not to say we don't commit those atrocities either. Certainly, people have complained for years about typos and nights at the dinner table, but I guess we're allowed because it's our company.
You're allowed to let those through, or to put them in your stuff. What cons are you planning to attend yourself this year, and which ones, if you all have talked about as a group, that you're going to?
Yeah, I was at Gen Con last summer. We, as a company, we always do Gary Con, which is coming up just in a few weeks. I know David is planning to attend that. I had thought I might not be able to attend because it's also my wife's spring break and we're thinking of going somewhere, but that hasn't materialized. So I might show up at Gary Con as well in a few weeks. Before COVID, used to always have a blast going to Origins, and brought my family there with 3 kids a number of times. We've always enjoyed that, so I want to get back to Origins one of these days. And then Gen Con again. Those are the 3 main cons. The last one I went to that was a smaller con that I had a ton of fun at was Phoenix Con, run by our friend Cosmo Joe of Studio D66, and I'm looking forward to attending that again if I can. The timing works out, and hope that he continues to run that and expand it.
Yeah, I know you all are mostly limited to kind of staying in the Midwest area. It usually seems like you only travel about 1 or 2 states away.
Well, when I worked full time for the company, I was very supportive of attending lots of cons, even if they weren't nearby, because I felt that we used it as a marketing thing, right? Just people knowing that we were around, we were still active. We weren't out of business. We didn't stop publishing. Still going to cons to kind of demonstrate that. So I've traveled around the country quite a bit doing that. Many years ago, not so much recently. I've been guest of honor at a con or two. Jolly certainly has, and we're open to that. If the schedule permits, Jolly certainly and perhaps me are certainly interested in being guests of honor if we can manage the time. So it just the local ones are a little bit more convenient from time commitment.
Yeah, of course. And I made no secret myself on hearing to you all about trying to get you all out here to the Pacific Northwest. But if somebody else was hoping to get you to come to their nearby home con, like what would they need to do? What kind of support would you all need? Or what legwork might they need to help do?
Yeah, I mean, schedule-wise, I think you want to contact us at least 6 months out. I would imagine you would want to do that anyway, just so you can, if you get our commitment, you could market it properly. If you want us to come to your con as a guest, most cons pay for you to get there and at least give you an artist type table for signing things, and you're selling a few things while you're there.
And so sorry.
I mean, for me, it's mostly about the schedule. Do I have time to go to this?
And are you, or do you know from experience with Dave and Jolly needing support in terms of being an invited guest or having travel covered?
Yeah.
Is that kind of a must for the most part?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So just something for us all to think about if you want to get the D team to come somewhere close to you.
Yeah.
I'm going to flip back to one of the personal questions. I don't think I caught this one earlier. What is your favorite race, class, fighting style kind of character to play in Hackmaster?
Oh,
and
there's a lot of questions there.
Or maybe your favorite Hackmaster character that you've ever played? Preferably 5th. You know, most of us play 5th, but we have some adherence to 4th on the server too.
Yeah, I play magic users a lot. I've played clerics a lot. Um, Barb Blackburn has had some very complimentary words and Knights at Dinner Table about my playing magic users lately, so I certainly appreciate that. But as far as my favorite race, I've always loved elves, and I know we tried to balance them a bit as the game evolved over the years. I know Steve Johansson was a big proponent of that, and kind of made them a lot weaker, I think, than they used to be in previous editions of RPGs. We didn't want them to be these superhumans like they were in Middle Earth. But and then classes. Sometimes, if I know the adventure is just going to be a hack fest, I like to be a fighter, kind of min-maxed fighter. I'll do that in Jolly's campaign sometimes, and just overpower whatever he can throw at us. But favorite like fighting move. I'm a big proponent of giving ground, much to the frustration of Dave and Steve, and so they've actually created a number of new rules around it. Some of which I'm not sure have been published yet, but I'm sure will certainly show up in later editions. Like, you can't give ground if somebody has a weapon bigger than yours, or if they're a larger size than yours. But I love using that combat maneuver whenever I can.
I have a player who's not logged on right now in one of my games who is quite the proponent of that as well. Which you actually did kind of beg the next question. I actually think I'm using that wrong. What kind of house rules do you tend to use, either at your table or at the table that you play with Jolly and Barb and Dave?
Yeah, I don't know if we really have house rules so much as rules improvements that we intend to introduce whenever we revise the game.
Treating it like your own playtest table?
Yeah, I mean, we try to play by the book. There's stuff we don't incorporate, like we don't really use fatigue rules. I can't really think of anything else that's a house rule, though. The house rules are all in the book.
They're all your house rules, right? You wrote the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Any of those maybe ones that y'all are testing out, you'd want to give us a preview of that we might see sometime in the future?
For like different types of rules?
Yeah, or rules changes y'all are considering for like the PHP rewrite or anything?
The game isn't going to completely change. I mean, it's an evolution more than a complete new edition or anything like that. It's just improving on things that through use and through feedback from other gaming groups we found are confusing to some people.
Yeah, so no specifics though you want to share?
No.
I'm not asking for the role, but maybe like
skills. Skills I would want to change to a rollover type system, and maybe even bring back the difficulty class concept, where it's more varied. I think we do have that in Hackmaster, where there's 4 or 5 different difficulty classes, but that was sort of a Band-Aid, honestly, when we were doing the rules, that we realized things weren't working that well. But I would like to have more numerical difficulty classes, more akin to like the 3rd edition, what they had done, where you just pick a number and you got to roll over it, and it's more at the discretion of the game master rather than these fixed. Average is always minus 40 or something like that. I'd like to see more continuous than discrete values. And maybe we'd still have those categories as a guideline. An average check is typically this, but then also have a range on it or something.
Yeah, so maybe 30 to 50 instead of just a straight 40 kind of thing.
Yeah. Give the game master some more flexibility on that.
One thing I actually would like to ask about, and it's something I cite quite often, both in rules discussions here on Discord and in my own games. Rule 1. Big bold letters, rule number 1. Who came up with that? And
What, the game master is always right?
well, if something is ambiguous, you have to rule against the player.
Oh, who do you think came up with that? Mr. Kenzer.
How did that go when
if you're not sure, yeah, it's always round down. It's always I think that was just to put a check on power gamers. We've had guys in our gaming group who are constantly debating rules and trying to bend things in their favor. And we do that sometimes when we play too, but I try to be honest about it and say, hey, I'm not trying to do this because I want to get my character out of a jam. I'm trying to do it because I think it's unclear, and I think we need to explain it better and make a rule about it. But we've had other people who were just always debating the rules and to try to get their character out of a sticky situation. And I think that's why Dave came up with that concept that it's always in the game master's favor. But I think it may seem a little harsh, but I think that adds to the challenge of the game and make you feel like you're really overcoming challenges and earning something when you do succeed. So that's a big part of Hackmaster. You start out so weak, especially if you use the 0 level rules. We had characters start with 1 hit point and survive to get to further levels by teamwork, and watching each other's back. And that to me makes the game so much more satisfying. I've had magic users with 3 strength survive and get up to higher level and get capable of really contributing.
Implying they don't contribute when they're lower level?
No, yeah.
Well, following on to your thing about your comment on like having more of those difficulty settings for skills, is one of our members asked about, Feat of Strength has a difficulty table enumerated in the books, but many of the other things don't, or could have more specific, like some of the specific skills don't have difficulty listings, or there's inconsistencies, in the way those are laid out in terms of, trivial is this, difficult is this. Are you planning, or are you working on expanding that in your future write-ups?
Oh, yeah, I haven't been. I've been writing Zealot's Guide, so if that's been going on our Slack channel, I haven't been aware of it.
Gotcha. Well, and you mentioned Zealot's Guide. I think, have we hit all of the Cleric classes now?
No, actually, I think there's something like 43 gods in the Calamaran Pantheon, and I'm working on book 10, I believe, which will have the imposters, the chaotic evil god of deceit, and also the cult of the four corners, which is the god of the traditional elements. And that's kind of a challenge because it's sort of like almost like 4 different classes in itself, and it does require a lot of new spells, and it's difficult to make fire clerics without having them break the game. So that's been taking me a little longer than I expected, but that's one thing I've been working on. And then, there's also a conversion we've been working on of Jolly Blackburn's old adventure, The Hungry Undead, with a monster called Shorjani from the Hacklopedia of Beasts 2. And we've converted that to the current edition, and still working on final edits for that. In fact, when you reminded me we had this seminar today, I said, oh yeah, I got to get back and edit that. So been working on that this afternoon before this meeting.
Gotcha. Nice. And so those are kind of the two biggest things that you're personally working on, or was that just meant to be like for all three of you what you're working on?
No, those are the two things I'm working on. I don't know what Jolly and Dave are working on right now, honestly. There's quite a lot of things that I think that I don't know what Jolly and Dave would say to this, but certainly my style is I get excited about something and I work on it for a while and then I set it aside and work on the next thing that kind of piques my fancy. And so I've got a lot of half finished things sitting around. Sometimes I just have to spend a whole weekend and say, all right, I'm going to finish this one book this weekend or something.
Um, how do the three of you tend to divide up the work that you do? Is it like somebody who kind of, I mean, does Jolly tend to handle one particular aspect of the publishing process, and Dave another, and you
Jolly
another?
is great at so many things. Certainly very creative. He's good at producing raw material. He's our one and only graphic designer right now, so he's in charge of all of our layout. Um, he's not the best athlete at final copy editing, so that tends to fall to Dave or his wife Suzanne, or me. George Fields has been great in that regard, and others. Mark Hall has helped as well. Some of the things we've been writing recently. So, it's Dave, I think, is juggling a lot of things too. He's working on a lot of new rewrites of the Hackmaster rules for the next edition, and certainly probably working on some things for his own home campaign that he runs pretty regularly. At least once a month. But because of the way we juggle things, I don't know what they have been working on last. Honestly, because we don't have a face-to-face office anymore that we all work at. I mean, we still have the office, of course, but we don't see each other as much as we used to, and so I'm a little out of touch with what they're doing.
Gotcha. You're finding it hard to kind of keep up and keep integrated in your work?
Yeah, after Steve died, we kind of went into panic mode and we started doing regular meetings to kind of figure out, okay, who's got what, who's got this piece of the broken company that they can pick up and figure out what to do about. After things settled down with that, we hadn't been doing them, and part of the reason for that is Jolly keeps a schedule that's much different from Dave and I. Dave and I both have full-time day jobs, and Jolly tends to work nights more often. I guess that's his creative sweet spot. So it's hard to set up regular meetings with that kind of schedule.
That makes some sense. Three different people on three different little time zones, and I don't think it surprised anyone to hear that you and Dave, you do other work outside of the company. And if I may, it's sensitive to ask about, but you brought up Steve, and one of our members was wondering, you mentioned George Fields has been doing a lot of stuff for you. I think was it Mark?
Mark Hall.
Mark Hall. But is there any intention of having someone kind of be fully integrated as a member of your development team, kind of as a replacement for Steve, or has that just kind of organically occurred, or is that just not even something you're thinking consciously about?
I think organically occurred is a good description of it. George has been a great volunteer for us for many years. He's collaborated with Steve on some projects before Steve died, and George just recently in January was able to acquire some stock and become a shareholder. So, he's not an employee. We really only have one full-time employee, and that's Jolly. And I think the market isn't really going to support us hiring anyone full-time new anytime soon. But I'm hoping we can collaborate with George more in the future. And Jeremy Graffenstein has done some very good stuff for us over the years. And he's actually on our Slack channel, provides a lot of input to new stuff we're working on.
And then, so you mentioned that organically was a good word. So those, you mentioned your Slack channel a few times about kind of adding people to that process, or people how someone becomes kind of one of those people you reach out to rather than approaching
how do you become a member of the inner circle?
But I'm not asking for me or anybody. I just learning about the inner workings of the company. I think sometimes the KenzerCo seems a little opaque, I think is the word. Or no, I think I'm saying it backwards.
No, that's a good description. I mean, at the peak of our productivity, we had 17 people. We had an office in Mundelein, Illinois, to both D&D and Hackmaster, and these things are cyclical. And after those licenses changed, some people left the company, and we didn't. We weren't in a position really to rehire any of the people that left. And we kind of got down to the core team of, it was really Steve, Dave, and Jolly, because I had left to go back to my engineering job and start making some money to put my kids through college. When Steve died, I decided, I got to get more involved. We've got to save this thing. I am a fairly significant shareholder of the company, so I don't want to see it die. But as far as people over the years, how they've gotten involved with us, I think a lot of it starts from volunteering at conventions, running games for us. We really appreciate that. I appreciate the work that Eli and you and others have done, just on Discord and Roll20 and any of these forums that I got to be honest, I don't really use that much nor understand how they work. But and just sometimes gaming with us, if you meet us at a convention and get involved in a game, and whether it's an organized event or not, or even some late night gaming, that's a good way to work your way into our inner circle. And being a moderator of any of our online, I want to say forums, even though we don't really have the forums anymore, but we had a number of people that were volunteers as moderators on our forums, and we certainly appreciate all of them doing that work.
I've been kind of coming up with a few new things, trying to dance around, because you mentioned a lot of the rules stuff, and future of the company is really at Dave Kenzer, and hopefully we'll be able to, maybe if he doesn't get on here before we wrap, hopefully we'll be able to reschedule with him. But there are a few I think you can answer, especially based on what you've talked about. One of the big ones is people note discrepancies, kind of, I hesitate to say power creep, but a little bit of a power creep in the Cleric classes. And so that the PHB and even the ZG1 and 2 classes can seem a little underwhelming compared to the later classes. And is there any plan to maybe revise those and kind of bring them more in line with how the balance of the newer classes, Cleric classes?
Yeah, I would definitely answer yes to that. I mean, I think if and when we go to the next edition, I would certainly want to take a crack at that. I think the classes that were in the player's handbook, that are in the player's handbook, were written with the material we had at the time. And as I'm developing new Cleric classes, I'm applying existing spells and things that I think make sense, but where there's gaps, I'm saying, okay, I've got to come up with new material. There's no reason a Cleric of whatever fire should have spells that involve I don't know, the homemaker, pick your Cleric, God of Vice, any of their spells. So I've really tried to add new material that is specific to the goal of the deity. And I think when we wrote the original ones, we just didn't have that depth of material. So I've written in the 2 Zealot's Guide book that I've worked on, 8 and 9, written a lot of new spells and created a lot of new cleric abilities to try to add more of that flavor. But I had books 1 through 7 to draw from as well. So that really helped, because there were a lot of existing spells that Steve and Dave and Jolly had written that kind of fit with some of these other classes, so that filled in some gaps. So I think if we went back to the ones in the Player's Handbook, we could do an even better job of that with all the materials that's out there now.
And even before rewrite, I imagine you're going to finish with all the Cleric classes, with all the Zealots guides. Are you all planning to release that as a single supplement also? I know there are a few people who have been holding off, actually, even on getting them or having them printed, like on a print-on-demand, because they want to get it all as one. And then on top of that, too, is if it's going to be released that way, is it going to be primarily a digital and print-on-demand? Do you all think you'll ever go back to more traditional publishing, where you actually print the books and send them to distributors?
We're trying to get away from too much physical inventory. That's not, I wouldn't say never, though. I don't want to make any declarations here. But right now our goal is to finish the last Zealots Guide book, which would be book 10. We have printed some physical copies to bring to conventions. And I think a lot of those are available print on demand. I don't know if we'll ever compile them into one book for sale electronically. That I think it'd be well over 200 pages if we did. But yeah, I don't know. More of a question for Mr. Kenzer, but
I assume I must get insight. So
yeah, I'm not aware of any plans we have to. That hasn't been our business model on that.
And then when we're talking again about people getting involved, you did mention, about people hosting events and things. I think I mentioned to you earlier today that the resurgence of the HackMaster Association, being done by a few members of our server here. We've got Andrew Franklin, Sir Strange, X-John. I only know them by their screen names. And so they've been doing a lot of work on that and had some questions about that. If just in terms of like how best the HMA can support the game, and kind of maybe what guidance might you have for them for like a good direction to take it or good things for them to focus on?
Yeah, I think one of the best things fans of the game can do is run demos for people who haven't played before and teach them how to play. I think Hackmaster can be intimidating to a lot of players. They don't want to read, this huge, got the player's handbook right here, 399 page book. I think we still give away Hackmaster Basic for free. Certainly on our old website, we did the PDF copy of it. I'd love to see that get in people's hands, give them a flavor for the game. I think teaching people, even if it's just teaching people how combat works, I think people, once they learn that count-up system, they really get a feel like, oh, I can do something every second. I can move. Wow, that's pretty cool. I don't really have to wait my turn, so to speak. So that's a much more engaging aspect of the game that I think impresses some people. And to be honest, we don't have the bandwidth and to go out and do demos. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that fans of the game can do.
And on that subject, you mentioned focusing on teaching combat, getting Hackmaster Basic into people's hands. But what other advice would you have for those who do want to demo Hackmaster, maybe at their local store or at their local con?
Yeah, I would try to simplify things at first as much as possible. So even when we do demos at conventions, a lot of times the character record sheets we use, the pre-gens, will have kind of a cheat sheet with all the different combat maneuvers like give ground and all that other stuff. I think a lot of that maybe just confuses people. That's what I would consider maybe an intermediate rule, not necessarily an advanced rule, but it's something you don't need to know to learn how combat works. So can't really overwhelm people with that kind of detail. It's more about understanding the count up system, the fact that you can move every second, explaining how surprise and initiative and your weapon speed works integrated with the count up system. That's all really important stuff to know. So, and the same goes for character creation. You can spend an hour or more creating a character, and some people really love that. In fact, when I was a youth, a friend of mine would come over and we'd just say, hey, do you want to create some D&D characters? And so we would just sit there and we'd roll dice and we'd create characters. That was fun for us. We wouldn't even necessarily use them. It was just like, oh, this is cool. I got this guy that does this. So there's certainly a benefit in that, I think, maybe having a character creation session where you just help people get into that nitty-gritty detail and create characters. I think that there's some fun in that. But it's two different aspects. If you want to teach combat, you maybe don't necessarily have that really detailed character creation session. You have pre-gens, and you explain, your core stats. You explain bonuses to hit and defend, the fact that there's opposed rolls. You can get into, initiative and weapon speed and all that kind of thing. But you don't necessarily have to explain how those numbers are generated based on how good your dex is or something, unless you got into the character creation process. So I think if you're demonstrating combat, try to keep it simple. But if you really want to give people a flavor for the game, those learn to create character sessions have some value too.
Hey, that's great info. Good direction on focus, I should say. Now I know you said you can't talk too much about a lot of things, but maybe you can mention if you all have had any conversations or just talked about if you want to incorporate a few things into the game that some people had questions with. One of the bigger ones, I think, being that would be bigger from a rules perspective is psionics, because I believe they were in 4th edition. Yeah. I didn't play 4th edition, unfortunately, but yeah. So is that something you all have brought up, or maybe already dismissed as not, something that would fit, or?
No, it's something I've wanted to work on, and in fact, we have a manuscript, and I did work on making some comments on it. I had kind of passed it off to George Field to see if he wanted to take it to the next step. The only problem with it is I felt like it was kind of a niche area, and that trying to finish off the clerics would be more useful to people. So I kind of set that aside.
I don't think you'll find anybody disagreeing with you here, because we do see that complaint here and there about wanting all the cleric classes in hand. So
right. Yeah, that's definitely a gap we need to fill, and I think we're close.
Well, like you mentioned, only 2 left, right?
Yeah. And the other aspect of that book would also be introducing 0-level rules for all the classes. So those are in the Game Master's Guide for all the clerics that were written at the time the Game Master's Guide was published. But we want to do those for all the clerics now in the final book.
And then another thing was, do you all have any games that you're collaborating on, or maybe someone's pitched to you to put out under your name other than Aces and Eights and Hackmaster?
We do. We have a submission by one of our great volunteers, Nate Sims, and he took the Hackmaster rules engine, basically applied it to a sci-fi game that we are calling Invasion Earth 2112, and I think it works really well. we created that what's essentially the Hackmaster gaming engine now, originally through Aces and Eights, and then adapted it to become the current edition of Hackmaster. And I think Nate has done much the same thing, where he's taken that engine and adapted it to a new genre. So we're looking forward to that. We're working on editing that right now, buying artwork.
Yeah, so like kind of in the like you've accepted the manuscript and now we're just working on like the final stages of getting it out, or
Well, I don't know if I'd
of
say
putting the
final
book together, I
because
should say.
it
Sorry.
hasn't been laid out yet. The next stages. The manuscript is very complete for sure.
Yeah, sorry.
Nate did a great job on it.
I'm still learning kind of the right way to describe the way the work goes. So something I hope to get more info on.
Yeah, I think you'll find there's periods of intense work and then periods of long gaps. So hopefully, if you're one of our freelancers, you don't give up on us. But when we find the time and really say, all right, I'm going to tackle this project, and we roll up our sleeves and get into the nitty gritty detail, we might get back to you with a ton of comments, and it may seem like overwhelming, but it's only because we're juggling a lot of things.
Yeah. I'll share with anyone else who was thinking about it. I've noticed a need to poke you all occasionally via email.
Yeah, a good way to get my attention is to resend an email that sort of be at the top of my inbox.
I can only imagine how full y'all's email inboxes must look. So, or how busy they must be. The ones you use for your work on KenzerCo.
Yeah.
That was
in 2015. I had 3,698 unread emails.
Do we have time for you to read off the number of them you have now? Those apparently those 12-sided D4s were a bit of a hit. Somebody was wondering if you all are planning to do more of those or another run of those.
I would love to. I think Steve kind of was one of the ones who introduced those to our group and was a big proponent of those. And it's not that kind of technical production work is something I don't really do. I remember if Jolly handled that or Dave or who did it, but I think we'd like to do that again for sure.
And then also, VTTs are, especially with the pandemic, have become really popular. Have you all been? What kind of work have you all been doing with, independent creators or anyone else to kind of get more character design and build or official content into the VTT platforms? We've had a few people talk about what they've done on here, but just kind of from your side of it.
All right, I'm going to ask a very stupid question. What was the acronym you just...
VTT, what? Virtual Tabletop. So Roll20, Foundry, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something we use much. We started playing online when the pandemic began. I know Jolly had been exploring Roll20 early on. It definitely has some benefits, especially if you're playing with people outside your local area, which he tends to do quite a bit, I think. But we always go back to face-to-face when we can. So none of us have really been that engaged in the virtual gaming, except maybe Jolly. He may be doing some more stuff. So, we're open to working with developers for that, but, personally, I don't really know what it entails.
Have you seen, we have a member here, goes by the name Knock, he's here with us today. You've been following his work on the Foundry system that he's been sharing with you all? Just out of curiosity, if you have that in the front of your brain anywhere?
No.
Sorry, Knock. There was one other thing I was going to... I apologize. I think I'm kind of running out of steam on stuff that it's kind of hard to approach, like you said, without Dave here, or some things that you kind of tangentially answered by accident. Get in here into some of the follow-ups.
Well, you know, it's funny. We asked me about plans for the company, like the D4s. You know, decisions like that are really up to Dave. So
Right.
he's got to be the driver for that.
You know, you gotta. I don't know if you saw them in our things. We have a couple of just like hellos, and one person mentioned they felt like Zalsky 9 was the best one of all the group. You know, give you your kudos where they're being shared here.
They felt that which one? Zealot's
9.
Guide 9?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I
I know after I wrote the Stormlord, the Clerics of the Stormlord, and sent those to George for editing, he sent me a note back and said, Brian, these guys are kick-ass. That's pretty enjoyable when somebody has that reaction to your work.
They did generate a decent little bit of conversation, I believe, when that first dropped. So,
Awesome.
Yeah. You know, I invite you to, you know, check in periodically, stay involved. I put up a notice requesting that they kind of not bombard you or Dave if you all choose to participate in our Discord server here. But we've got a ton of activity going on, even more since the forums went down when you switched websites. And so,
Yeah.
you know, like I said, Dave joining made us hit 200, and Dave just logged back on. Let's see if he manages to join us.
I got a convention invite from Dwarf.
So, but yeah, you know, and like I said, hopefully you'll stick around and be able to continue sharing some of your thinking, and or just, you know, join in the chats, talking about character builds and lore. As I said, it shows Dave is logged on. We've been going for about an hour now. Has he mentioned anything to you? Should we wait for him to see if he joins, or maybe we should just call it?
I'm gonna go on mute, and I'm gonna try to call him.
Okay. I'm gonna pause our recording for a minute then while you do that, and if we start back up, then I will bring it back up. But otherwise, we've been talking with Brian Jelke from KenzerCo.
All right.